I was a ghost in a hoodie, the quiet bookworm no one noticed until the day the school's queen bees decided I was their next target. They pushed, I broke, and in that moment, the predator became the prey. The thing about high school hallways is that they have their own ecosystem, a vicious little food chain where everyone knows their place. You have the predators, the prey, and the ones who are just part of the scenery. For 3.5 years, I had perfected the art of being scenery. My name is Imani, and my camouflage was a stack of books, a pair of oversized glasses, and a profound ability to mind my own business. I was the quiet black girl, the one who always had the right answer in AP chemistry, but never raised her hand unless called on. To everyone at Northwood High, I was just there, a ghost in a hoodie, and that's exactly how I wanted it. My dad always told me that true strength wasn't about being the loudest person in the room. It was about stillness, control. He'd started teaching me when I was 6, in the dojo he built in our garage. The scent of polished wood and sweat was the smell of my childhood. He taught me katas until they were as natural as breathing. He taught me how to break a board with a palm heel strike, and more importantly, how to walk away from a fight without throwing a single punch. The ultimate goal of karate, he'd say, his voice a low, calm rumble, is to not have to use it. I took that to heart. It became my mantra. So, at school, I was Imani the bookworm, not Imani, first Dan black belt. No one knew, and no one needed to. The predators at Northwood High came in a 3-headed pack: Tiffany, Jessica, and Brittany. They were the undisputed queens of the school, a terrifying trinity of expensive handbags, perfectly straightened hair, and casual cruelty. Tiffany was the leader, a girl whose smile was a weapon and whose wealth insulated her from any real consequences. Jessica was her enforcer, a volleyball player with shoulders like a linebacker, and a perpetually bored expression that suggested hitting someone was a mild inconvenience. Brittany was the mouthpiece, the one who weaponized gossip, and could socially execute someone with a single, well-timed whisper. For years I was beneath their notice. I was scenery, remember? But that all changed in senior year, over something as stupid and insignificant as a boy. His name was Liam. He was new, a transfer from a private school, with kind eyes and a brain that actually worked. We were paired up for a physics project, and to my surprise, we actually clicked. We'd spend lunches in the library, not flirting, but genuinely geeking out over gravitational theory. I felt for the first time like someone actually saw me. Unfortunately, Tiffany had already decided Liam was her next accessory, and she did not like what she was seeing. It started small. A shoulder check from Jessica in the crowded hallway that sent my books flying. I felt the familiar jolt, the spark of indignation, but my dad's voice echoed in my head. Breathe, Imani. Control the situation before it controls you. So I took a deep breath, gathered my things, and kept walking, ignoring Brittany's saccharine sweet, "Oh, watch where you're going, nerd." Then it escalated. My locker was vandalized with permanent marker, calling me things I won't repeat here. Whispers would follow me down the hall, sharp and ugly. They started a rumor that I was stalking Liam, that I was obsessed with him. It was humiliating. Every instinct my father had drilled into me screamed for restraint. Be water, not rock. Flow around the obstacle. Don't meet force with force. So I did. I kept my head down. I ignored them. I focused on my grades, on graduation, on getting the hell out of there. I thought if I just endured it, they'd get bored and move on. But I had forgotten a key principle of the predator-prey relationship. Weakness is an invitation. My silence, my refusal to engage, wasn't seen as strength or discipline. To them, it looked like fear. It emboldened them. And one rainy Tuesday afternoon, they decided they were tired of the game. I was in the library, my sanctuary. It was after school, and I was waiting for my dad to pick me up. The room was mostly empty, save for the librarian, Mrs. Davison, who was currently occupied in the back office. I was trying to lose myself in a novel, trying to ignore the gnawing anxiety in my stomach, when their shadows fell over my table. I didn't even have to look up to know who it was. The sickly sweet scent of Tiffany's perfume filled the air. "Look what we have here," Tiffany purred, her voice dripping with mock sympathy. Little Miss Perfect. All alone. I kept my eyes on the page, my heart starting to hammer against my ribs. Don't engage. Be scenery. You're not here. She's ignoring us, Brittany giggled. How rude. Jessica's hand slammed down on my book, making me jump. Tiffany's talking to you. Her voice was flat, bored, and utterly menacing. Slowly, I looked up. All three of them were standing over me, blocking any chance of escape. Tiffany leaned in close, her face a mask of smug superiority. I'm only going to say this once. Stay away from Liam. He's mine. You're nothing but a charity case he feels sorry for. Got it. The words were meant to cut, and they did. But it wasn't the insult that made the world slow down. It was what happened next. To punctuate her threat, Jessica reached out and shoved my shoulder. Hard. It wasn't a casual bump. It was a violent, deliberate act of aggression, designed to intimidate, to put me in my place. The shove sent me reeling back in my chair. My glasses flew off my face, and the stack of books I'd so carefully arranged on the table crashed to the floor with a deafening series of thuds that echoed in the silent library. And in that instant, something inside me shifted. For years, my training had been a quiet hum in the background of my life, a discipline of control and restraint. But when Jessica's hand made contact, that hum roared to life. My dad's voice was still there, but it was distant now, drowned out by a different instinct. The world narrowed to the three faces in front of me. Tiffany's cruel smirk, Brittany's nervous titter, Jessica's look of contempt. My entire body went rigid, not with fear, but with a terrifying, coiled focus. It was a different kind of stillness now. Not the peaceful stillness of meditation, but the coiled stillness of a predator that has just been provoked. They thought they had cornered a timid mouse. They had no idea they had just kicked a hornet's nest. Tiffany saw the change in my eyes, and her smirk widened. "What's the matter?" she taunted. "Gonna cry?" And in that moment, as I looked at the three of them, haloed by the dim library lights, I knew one thing for certain. They had just made the biggest mistake of their lives. I didn't cry. My breath didn't even catch in my throat. I knelt on the worn library carpet, the world a soft, indistinct blur without my glasses. I felt for them, my fingers brushing against the cold linoleum, and picked them up. One of the lenses was slightly askew. As I pushed them back onto my face, the fuzzy shapes of my tormentors snapped into sharp, ugly focus. The world came back, and so did I. But the Imani who stood up was not the one who had been knocked down. My father taught me about Zanshin. It's a state of relaxed awareness, of total presence in the moment. As I rose to my feet, my posture shifted. My shoulders, usually slumped forward to make myself smaller, squared up. My spine straightened. I centered my weight, my feet planting themselves on the floor with an unconscious, practiced stability. It was a subtle change, one that 99% of the population wouldn't notice, but it was everything. The meek, bookish girl was gone. In her place stood someone else, someone whose stillness was not passive, but predatory. Jessica scoffed, mistaking my silence for shock. "Lost your tongue, freak? Or did the fall knock the big words out of your head?" She took a step forward, reaching out to grab the front of my hoodie. "When Tiffany tells you to do something." Her words were cut off. She never completed the sentence, because the moment her fingers were about to close on my sweatshirt, my hand moved. It wasn't a panicked slap or a desperate block. It was a fluid, economical motion, an upward circular parry that met her wrist. My fingers wrapped around her arm, not in a tight grip, but with a precise hold on the pressure points. I didn't pull, I didn't push, I guided. Using the full force of her own forward momentum against her, I pivoted on the ball of my left foot. Jessica, expecting resistance, found none. Instead, she found herself being spun, her entire body twisting in an awkward, uncontrolled arc. She let out a startled yelp as she stumbled past me, her balance completely shattered. She careened sideways into a row of bookshelves, the impact causing a cascade of history textbooks to thump heavily to the floor. The sound was shockingly loud in the silent library. Jessica stood frozen for a beat, her back to me, her hand braced against the shelf to keep from falling. She was breathing heavily, more from shock and confusion than exertion. She didn't understand what had just happened. One second she was moving to grab me, the next she was facing a wall of books about the American Revolution. Brittany gasped, a tiny, terrified sound, and took a full step back, her eyes wide as saucers. Even Tiffany's perfectly constructed mask of condescending boredom cracked. A flicker of disbelief, of genuine surprise, crossed her face before she quickly suppressed it. I hadn't moved from my spot. I just lowered my hand back to my side. I looked at Jessica's back, then shifted my gaze to meet Tiffany's. My voice, when I spoke, was unrecognizable. It wasn't the quiet, hesitant murmur they were used to. It was low, calm, and utterly devoid of fear. "The first time," I said, my voice cutting through the tense silence, "was a mistake. Your mistake." I let the words hang in the air for a moment. "There will not be a second time." Tiffany stared at me, her mind clearly racing, trying to process this new data. This wasn't in the script. I wasn't supposed to fight back. I was supposed to cower, to cry, to run to a teacher. This quiet, effortless defiance was something she had no framework for. But Tiffany wasn't a queen bee because she backed down. Her surprise quickly hardened into pure rage. Her face flushed a blotchy red. "You think you're tough," she snarled, her voice a venomous hiss. She jabbed a perfectly manicured finger at me. "You're a nobody. Jessica, what are you waiting for? Are you going to let this thing get away with that? Put her on the floor." The social pressure was a tangible thing in the room. Jessica's reputation as the enforcer, her place in the hierarchy, was on the line. Slowly she turned around. The confusion was gone from her face, replaced by a mask of raw, humiliated fury. Her eyes locked on me, narrowed and dangerous. She saw my calm expression, my unwavering stance, and it was like throwing gasoline on a fire. To her it was mockery. "You're going to regret that," she growled, her voice low and guttural. She lowered her stance like a predator about to spring. She was a volleyball player, powerful and athletic. She wasn't going to try to grab me this time. She was going to charge. She was going to use her size and strength to simply run me over, to smash me into the unforgiving oak bookshelf behind me. I saw the intention in her eyes, in the way she coiled her muscles. The library, the books, the fading afternoon light through the tall windows, it all began to recede. My focus narrowed until there was only the space between us, a distance of about 10 feet. The world went silent, all except for the sound of my own steady breathing. My dad's lessons, thousands of hours of repetition in our garage dojo, rose from muscle memory into conscious thought. This wasn't a high school fight anymore. This was a confrontation, and I knew exactly what I was going to do. Jessica let out a furious yell and launched herself at me. Time seemed to warp and stretch. Jessica's furious yell echoed in the cavernous silence of the library, but to me it was a distant sound, like a wave crashing on a faraway shore. Her charge was fast. I'll give her that. It was a blur of righteous anger and athletic power. To an untrained eye, it would have been an unstoppable collision, but my father didn't train me for the predictable. He trained me for chaos. He taught me that a direct attack is a gift. It's a straight line, and a straight line is the easiest thing in the world to avoid. As Jessica closed the 10-foot gap between us in what felt like a single heartbeat, I didn't backpedal. I didn't raise my hands to block. I waited until the last possible nanosecond, until I could feel the air displaced by her body, until her enraged face filled my vision. Then I moved. It was a simple pivot, a Tai Sabaki movement that was as ingrained in me as my own name. I shifted my weight to my right foot and spun 90 degrees to my left, my body moving like a matador's cape. Jessica, having committed every ounce of her momentum to plowing straight through me, suddenly found nothing there. She shot past the spot where I'd been standing, her forward motion now a liability, pulling her off balance. She was a runaway train, and I had just stepped off the tracks. But I wasn't done. As she hurtled past, my right hand came up. It wasn't a fist. It was open, the heel of my palm hard and ready. It connected with her solar plexus, right below the sternum. It wasn't a wild swing. It was a focused, driving strike, using the rotation of my own body to generate power. I put just enough behind it. Enough to make a point. The impact made a sound like a deflating basketball. Whump! All the air rushed out of Jessica's lungs in a single, explosive gasp. Her eyes went wide, not with pain, but with pure, unadulterated shock. The fury was gone, replaced by a desperate, panicked need for oxygen that wasn't there. Her charge stopped instantly. Her body went completely limp, folding in on itself like a cheap suit. She crumpled to the floor, landing on her knees before tipping over onto her side, wheezing and clutching at her stomach, her face pale. The silence that followed was absolute. It was heavier, more profound than before. Brittany looked from Jessica's gasping form on the floor to me, her mouth hanging open in a perfect, silent "oh." Her face was as white as a sheet. She looked like she'd just seen a ghost. Tiffany's reaction was different. Her jaw was clenched so tight I could see the muscles twitching in her cheek. The rage was still there, but now it was mixed with something else, something I hadn't seen in her before, a sliver of genuine fear. She looked at me, at my calm, neutral expression, and for the first time, she wasn't looking at the nerdy black girl. She was looking at a threat she couldn't comprehend. I took a slow, deliberate step back, putting more space between us. I lowered my hand and let out a steadying breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Adrenaline was a cold fire in my veins, but my mind was crystal clear. "I told you," I said, my voice still quiet, still controlled. "There wouldn't be a second time." "What? What did you do to her?" Brittany stammered, finally finding her voice. It was a high-pitched, terrified squeak. Before I could answer, a new voice cut through the tension. "What is going on in here?" It was Mrs. Davison, the librarian. She emerged from her office, her brow furrowed with annoyance at the commotion. She took in the scene. Books scattered on the floor, Jessica on her side gasping for air, and me standing over her. Her eyes widened in alarm. And in that instant Tiffany proved why she was the queen. Her fear vanished, replaced by a mask of brilliant, calculated victimhood. Her eyes welled up with crocodile tears. She pointed a trembling finger at me. "Mrs. Davison, thank God, she attacked us," Tiffany cried, her voice laced with manufactured hysteria. "We were just talking to her, and she
just went crazy. She pushed Jessica into the shelves and then she hit her, for no reason." Brittany, seeing her cue, immediately started nodding frantically. "It's true, she just snapped. It was terrifying." Mrs. Davison's gaze snapped to me, her expression hardening from concern to suspicion. She saw what Tiffany wanted her to see. The popular girls, one of them injured on the floor, and the quiet, strange girl standing over them like some kind of predator. The narrative wrote itself. My silence, which seconds ago had been a source of strength, was now a sign of guilt. "Imani Williams," Mrs. Davison said, her tone sharp and accusatory. "Is this true?" I opened my mouth to speak, to defend myself, to tell her what really happened. But what could I say? She shoved me, so I used a perfectly executed palm heel strike to her celiac plexus. It sounded insane. It sounded like a lie. Tiffany's version, as outrageous as it was simpler. It was easier to believe. She started it, was all I could manage, and the words sounded weak even to my own ears. "Started it?" Tiffany shrieked, playing her role to perfection. "Look at Jessica. Does it look like we started it?" Just then, the double doors of the library swung open with a soft whoosh. Standing there was Principal Thompson. He was a tall, imposing man with a permanent scowl etched onto his face. He had clearly heard the commotion from the hallway. His sharp eyes scanned the chaotic scene in a single, sweeping glance, lingering on the weeping Tiffany, the terrified Brittany, and the gasping Jessica on the floor. His gaze finally landed on me. He didn't see the prelude. He didn't see the bullying, the shove, the threat. He only saw the aftermath. He only saw the picture Tiffany had so expertly painted for him. His expression, already stern, became glacial. He took a long stride into the room, his polished shoes clicking ominously on the linoleum. He didn't address the group. He didn't ask what happened. He looked directly at me, his eyes filled with a cold, damning certainty. "Miss Williams," he said, and his voice was like the cracking of ice. "My office, now." The walk to Principal Thompson's office was the longest walk of my life.
It felt like a green mile with the accusing eyes of Mrs. Davison and the triumphant venomous glare of Tiffany boring into my back. Brittany was helping a still wheezing Jessica to her feet, cooing over her like she'd just survived a shark attack. It was a masterclass in theatrics, and I was the designated villain. I didn't say a word. There was nothing to say that wouldn't be twisted, no defense that wouldn't sound like a desperate excuse. My dad's words echoed in my head, but they were a bitter comfort now. The ultimate goal of karate is to not have to use it. Well, I'd used it, and now I was walking into the fire. Thompson's office was designed to intimidate. It was old dark wood, leather-bound books that looked like they'd never been opened, and a massive mahogany desk that served as a fortress between him and the student body. He gestured to a stiff-backed chair, and I sat, my hands clasped tightly in my lap to stop them from shaking. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving a cold, trembling dread in its wake. He sat down opposite me, leaning back in his high-backed leather chair, with a sigh that suggested I was the greatest disappointment of his week. "Imani," he began, his voice deceptively calm, "you have been a model student for 3.5 years, perfect grades, no disciplinary record. I'll admit I'm having a hard time squaring that with the scene I just walked into. So I want you to tell me, from your perspective, what happened in that library." For a fleeting moment, a spark of hope ignited in my chest. He was going to listen. He was going to be fair. I took a deep breath. "They cornered me," I started, my voice quiet but steady. "Tiffany, Jessica, and Brittany. They've been bothering me for a while now. They threatened me. Jessica shoved me, hard. My glasses went flying. I hesitated, trying to find the words to explain the next part without sounding like a lunatic. "I defended myself." Thompson steepled his fingers, his expression unreadable. "Defended yourself," he repeated, the words flat and devoid of belief. "Jessica is currently on her way to the nurse's office, barely able to breathe. Mrs. Davison, a respected member of my staff, witnessed you standing over her while Tiffany and Brittany were in tears. And you call that self-defense?" "She was going to attack me again," I insisted, my voice rising slightly. "She charged at me." "And how, exactly, did you defend yourself?" he asked, a hint of sarcasm creeping into his tone. "Did you trip her? Push her away?" I stared at the polished surface of his desk. How could I explain it? The pivot, the strike, the years of training that made it an instinctual reaction. "It was a martial arts move," I mumbled, feeling the heat rise in my cheeks. It sounded ridiculous, like a line from a bad movie. Thompson let out a short, humorless laugh. "A martial arts move. I see. So you're claiming that these 3 girls, who have never been in any serious trouble I'm aware of, ganged up on you, and you, the quiet honor student, subdued one of them with a karate chop." His condescension was a physical blow. He wasn't listening. He was mocking me. He had already made up his mind. I was the liar. I was the one who had snapped. It was a story that made sense in his world. Tiffany's father was a major donor to the school, a fact everyone knew. I was just a quiet girl from the other side of town. The math wasn't difficult. "It's the truth," I said, my voice barely a whisper. The hope I'd felt moments before was extinguished, replaced by a cold, hard knot of injustice in my stomach. "The truth," he said, leaning forward and resting his elbows on the desk, "is that I have 3 witnesses, one of whom is a staff member whose stories all align. They say you launched an unprovoked attack. I have a victim who may require medical attention, and I have you with a story about martial arts moves. Imani, I'm going to have to call your father. Given the severity of this, we're looking at a suspension, at the very least." My blood ran cold. Suspension. That would go on my permanent record. It could jeopardize my college applications, the scholarships I was counting on. It was a nightmare. All those years of being the perfect student, of being scenery, were about to be erased by one moment, one reaction they had pushed me to. "You can't," I pleaded, the desperation raw in my voice. "This isn't fair. They're lying." "That will be all, Miss Williams," he said, his tone final. He reached for his phone. "Wait in the outer office. I'll call you back in when your father gets here." Defeated, I walked out and slumped into one of the uncomfortable plastic chairs in the waiting area. The secretary refused to meet my eye. I felt like a pariah. I stared at the floor, replaying the scene in my head. Had I been wrong? Should I have just taken the shove? Let Jessica grab me? Let them humiliate me again? My father's words came back, twisted and mocking. Control the situation before it controls you. I had lost control. I had reacted, and in doing so, I had walked straight into Tiffany's trap. It felt like an eternity before I heard the main office door open. I looked up, expecting to see my dad's worried face. Instead, 2 police officers walked in. They were in full uniform, their presence immediately sucking all the air out of the room. My heart leaped into my throat. One of them, a tall man with a grim expression, approached the secretary. "We're here about an assault. A student named Jessica Miller." The secretary, wide-eyed, pointed a trembling finger toward Principal Thompson's closed door. My mind went blank with terror. An assault? They called the police? This wasn't about a suspension anymore. This was something else entirely. Tiffany hadn't just set a trap. She'd set a forest fire. The officers knocked and entered Thompson's office. I could hear muffled voices, Thompson's deep baritone, and the sharper, more official tones of the policemen. A few minutes later, the door opened again. Principal Thompson stood in the doorway, his face pale and grave. He didn't look at me. He looked past me toward the main entrance. Following his gaze, I saw my dad. He had just walked in, his brow furrowed with concern. He saw me, then he saw the police officers in the office, and his expression hardened. But before he could even take a step towards me, one of the officers emerged from the office, followed by a teary-eyed, triumphant-looking Tiffany, with her mother, a woman who looked like an older, more severe version of her daughter, clutching her arm protectively. The officer looked from Tiffany to me. He had a notepad in his hand. "Imani Williams," he asked, his voice echoing in the silent office. I could only nod, my throat too tight to speak. He took a step towards me. "I'm Officer Miller," he said. And then he dropped the bomb that shattered my entire world. "Jessica is my daughter, and you're under arrest for assault and battery." The words hung in the sterile air of the office, thick and suffocating. Under arrest. The phrase didn't compute. It was something from TV shows, not something that happened in the principal's office to an honor roll student. My dad took a step forward, his face a thundercloud of disbelief and fury. "Arrest? On what grounds? My daughter is the one who was being bullied. Officer Miller." Jessica's father turned his cold, professional gaze on my dad. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to calm down. We have multiple witnesses, including a teacher, who state that your daughter physically assaulted my daughter without provocation. Given the nature of the injuries, Mrs. Miller and I are pressing charges." "Injuries?" My dad scoffed, his voice vibrating with controlled rage. "What injuries? A bruised ego." "She struck my daughter in the chest with enough force to knock the wind out of her and cause severe abdominal bruising," Officer Miller stated, his voice flat and rehearsed, as if he were reading from a report. He looked back at me, his eyes filled with a chilling mixture of paternal anger and professional detachment. "Imani Williams, please stand up and put your hands behind your back." My world tilted on its axis. This couldn't be happening. I looked at Tiffany and her mother. Tiffany had a small, vicious smile playing on her lips, a look of pure, unadulterated victory. Her mother, a woman dripping in quiet, expensive jewelry, looked at me with the kind of disdain one might reserve for an insect. They had done this. They had twisted the truth into a weapon and were now using the full force of the law to destroy me. "No," my dad said, his voice a low growl. He moved to stand between me and the officer. "You are not putting handcuffs on my child. This is a school matter. It's insane." The second officer, who had been silent until now, stepped forward, his hand resting casually on the butt of his sidearm. "Sir, I understand you're upset, but interfering with an arrest is a serious offense. You need to step aside." The air crackled with tension. Principal Thompson, who had been standing by his office door looking increasingly panicked, wrung his hands. "Officers, perhaps we can de-escalate this. A suspension—" "This is beyond a suspension, Mr. Thompson," Tiffany's mother cut in, her voice like shards of ice. This girl is violent and a danger to the other students. We want her expelled, and we want her charged. We will not be dropping this." My dad looked at me, his eyes searching mine. He saw the terror, the confusion, the crushing weight of the injustice. He took a deep, steadying breath. The years of discipline he had taught me now, evident in his own posture. He knew a fight in the principal's office wouldn't help. He gave me a small, almost imperceptible nod. "Be water, Imani. Flow around the obstacle." He stepped aside. His face was a mask of stone, but I could see the fire burning in his eyes. Officer Miller took my arm. His grip was firm, impersonal. "Let's go," he said, leading me towards the main entrance. I felt 100 pairs of eyes on me. Students who were loitering in the hallway stopped and stared, their phones magically appearing in their hands. Whispers erupted like wildfire. "That's her, the one who attacked Jessica Miller. They're arresting her." Brittany was there, of course, narrating the scene to a rapt audience, her words painting me as a violent psychopath. I didn't resist. I didn't cry. I walked. I focused on my breathing, on putting one foot in front of the other. The walk out of the school was 100 times worse than the walk to the principal's office. This was a public shaming. Tiffany hadn't just won. She was parading her victory for the entire school to see. Outside, a police car was parked in the red zone right in front of the school. Officer Miller opened the back door. The world seemed to shrink to the small, dark interior of that car. This was it. This was real. "Dad," I whispered, my voice finally cracking. He was right beside me, his hand on my shoulder. "I'm right here, Imani," he said, his voice a low, reassuring anchor in the storm. "Don't say a word to them. Not one word until I get you a lawyer. Do you understand?" I nodded, a single tear finally escaping and tracing a hot path down my cheek. He squeezed my shoulder, a silent promise of the fight to come. I ducked my head and slid into the back of the car. The door slammed shut with a sickening finality, sealing me inside the cage of plastic and metal. Through the wire mesh, I saw Tiffany and her mother talking to Principal Thompson. I saw my dad, his face etched with the fury I had never seen before, pulling out his phone. The car started, and the school, my entire life, began to pull away. I watched it recede through the rear window, a place that had been my sanctuary and my prison, now just a brick building full of lies. My future, my scholarships, my carefully constructed life, it all felt like it was turning to ash. Tiffany hadn't just won a high school grudge match. She had used her power, her influence, and her father's badge to try and ruin me. We drove in silence for what felt like hours. The police station was a drab, soulless building. I was fingerprinted. They took my mugshot, the flash of the camera branding the humiliation onto my soul. I was placed in a small, cold holding cell with a concrete bench. The heavy steel door clanged shut, and the lock echoed in the silence. I was alone, truly alone. The quiet bookworm, the karate black belt. None of it mattered now. I was just a number in the system, a girl in a concrete box, accused of a crime I didn't commit in the way they said I did. The weight of it all crashed down on me. I slid down the cold wall onto the bench and finally let the sobs come, silent and racking, my body shaking with fear and despair. Hours passed. I had no idea what time it was. The world outside the cell had ceased to exist. Then I heard footsteps. A guard's face appeared in the small barred window of the door. "Williams, you have a visitor. Your lawyer's here." I wiped my face with the sleeve of my hoodie and stood up on shaky legs. The guard led me to a small, sterile interrogation room. Sitting at the table wasn't my dad, but a woman I'd never seen before. She was sharp, impeccably dressed in a dark pantsuit, with intelligent eyes that missed nothing. She stood as I entered. "Imani," she said, her voice calm and confident. "My name is Sarah Jennings. Your father called me. I'm your attorney." She gestured to the chair opposite her. "Please sit down. We need to talk." I sat, numb. "What's going to happen?" I asked, my voice hoarse. "They're charging you with assault and battery," she said, getting straight to the point. "Normally, for a minor with no record, this might be handled in juvenile court. But the Millers are pushing for you to be charged as an adult. They're claiming the use of specialized martial arts training constitutes assault with a deadly weapon. The room spun. A deadly weapon? My hands. But that's insane. I was defending myself. I know, Sarah said, her eyes holding mine, and we're going to prove it. Your father told me a bit about your training. He also told me about the bullying, which the school conveniently failed to mention to the police. Now I need you to tell me everything. Every detail. Don't leave anything out. So I told her. I told her about Tiffany, Jessica, and Brittany. About the whispers, the vandalized locker, the constant low-level harassment. I told her about the library, the shove, the threat. I described the exact sequence of events, the pivot, the palm heel strike, everything. She listened intently, taking meticulous notes, her expression never changing. When I finished, she was silent for a moment. Then she looked up from her notepad. This is good, she said. Difficult, but good. Their entire case rests on the testimony of Tiffany, Brittany, and Mrs. Davison. It's a classic, he said, she said. Or in this case, she said, they said. She tapped her pen on the table. What they don't know is that we have a silent witness. I stared at her, confused. A witness? Who? There was no one else there. Sarah Jennings allowed herself a small, confident smile. The Northwood High Library was renovated 2 years ago with a grant from a tech company. Your father mentioned it. He was on the PTA committee that approved the budget. She leaned forward, and her voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper, her eyes gleaming with the thrill of the hunt. They installed a state-of-the-art, motion-activated security system, high-definition cameras, in every corner of that room. The words hit me like a physical force. Cameras. A wild, electrifying hope surged through me, so potent it almost made me dizzy. It was like being in a dark tunnel and suddenly seeing a pinprick of light. Are you sure? I breathed, leaning forward, my hands gripping the edge of the cold metal table. They have cameras in the library. I'm positive, Sarah said, her smile widening slightly, and I have already filed a motion for discovery, specifically requesting all security footage from the library for the date and time of the incident. It's a standard request, but given the circumstances, I've also filed an emergency injunction to ensure that footage is preserved and not accidentally erased. She made air quotes around the word accidentally. Principal Thompson is going to have a very interesting morning tomorrow. For the first time since Jessica's hand had slammed down on my book, I felt like I could breathe again. The truth was there. It wasn't just my word against theirs. It was on tape. Every shove, every sneer, every threatening step. They had lied, and they were about to be caught in the most spectacular way imaginable. So, what happens now? I asked, my voice trembling with a mixture of relief and anxiety. Now we get you out of here, Sarah said, her tone all business. Your arraignment is in the morning. We'll plead not guilty. The Millers will object to bail, claiming you're a flight risk or a danger to the community. It's nonsense, but they'll try. I'll argue you're an honor student with no priors and deep ties to the community. The judge will grant bail. Your father is already prepared to post it. You'll be home by tomorrow afternoon. It all sounded so simple when she said it, so logical. She was a warrior, just a different kind than my father. Her dojo was the courtroom, and her weapons were motions and injunctions. I trusted her completely. The next morning was a blur. I was transported to the courthouse, a terrifying, imposing building that smelled of old paper and anxiety. I stood before a judge in a crowded, noisy courtroom, feeling small and exposed. Sarah was by my side, a bastion of calm professionalism. Just as she predicted, the prosecutor, urged on by a furious-looking Officer Miller and his wife in the gallery, argued passionately against bail. Sarah calmly dismantled his arguments one by one. She presented my report cards, letters of recommendation from teachers for the scholarships I was now unlikely to get, and a signed affidavit from my dad. The judge, a stern-faced woman with tired eyes, listened patiently. When all was said and done, she banged her gavel. Bail is set at $5,000. The defendant is to have no contact with the victim or the other witnesses. Next case. Just like that, it was over. A few hours later, after a mountain of paperwork, I was walking out of the courthouse into the bright, blinding sunlight. a free person. My dad wrapped me in a hug so tight it felt like he was trying to put my shattered pieces back together. "It's okay, Imani," he whispered into my hair. "We're going to fight this. We're going to win." The next few days were agonizingly slow. I was suspended from school pending the outcome of the legal proceedings, so I was a prisoner in my own home. My name was all over the school's social media. I was a monster, a thug, a psycho who had brutally attacked poor, innocent Jessica. Tiffany and Brittany had crafted a compelling narrative of my unhinged violence, and everyone believed it. My so-called friends went silent. No calls, no texts. I was radioactive. Sarah called every day with updates. The school was dragging its feet on releasing the security footage. Principal Thompson claimed there were privacy concerns involving other students. "He's stalling," Sarah told me over the phone, her voice tight with frustration. "He's trying to protect the Millers and the school's reputation. But the judge signed the order. He has to comply. He's just making it difficult." Finally, a week after my arrest, Sarah called with the news I'd been waiting for. "We have it," she said, and I could hear the triumph in her voice. "The IT director at the school district, under threat of contempt of court, found the file and sent it over. I've just finished watching it. Imani, it's everything we hoped for. It's crystal clear." Relief washed over me so completely I had to sit down. "What do we do now?" "Now we change the game," she said. "I've sent a copy to the district attorney's office with a formal request to drop all charges. I've also sent a copy to a certain Officer Miller's commanding officer in the Internal Affairs Division, along with a formal complaint regarding his abuse of power in arresting a minor in a case where he had a direct personal conflict of interest. But that's not all." There was a pause. "I think it's time we played Tiffany's game, but better. How do you feel about a little public relations?" The meeting was set for the next day in Sarah's conference room. My dad and I sat on one side of the long, polished table. On the other side sat Tiffany, her mother, and their lawyer, a smug-looking man in an expensive suit. Officer Miller was there too, in his civilian clothes, looking deeply uncomfortable. Principal Thompson sat at the head of the table, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. "Thank you all for coming," Sarah began, her voice cool and commanding. "We're here today because my client, Imani Williams, has been falsely accused of a crime. The district attorney is currently reviewing evidence that will not only exonerate my client, but will also have serious implications for several people in this room." Tiffany's lawyer scoffed. "Ms. Jennings, we have 3 eyewitnesses. Your client's violent fantasy isn't evidence." "Oh, but I'm not talking about fantasy," Sarah said, picking up a remote control. "I'm talking about this." She pointed the remote at a large screen on the conference room wall. It flickered to life, and there it was. The Northwood High Library, captured in silent, high-definition clarity. Everyone in the room leaned forward. The video showed me, sitting at the table, reading my book. Then, the 3 of them appeared, their body language aggressive and menacing even without sound. The camera angle was perfect. It captured Tiffany leaning in, her face twisted in a sneer. It captured Jessica slamming her hand on my book. And then it captured the most crucial moment of all. We all watched as Jessica deliberately, violently shoved me. My glasses flew. My books tumbled. The footage was undeniable. It was a clear, unambiguous assault. A collective gasp went through the room. Principal Thompson's face went pale. Tiffany's lawyer stared at the screen, his smug expression melting away. Tiffany and her mother looked like they'd been slapped. Sarah let the tape play. She let them watch as I stood up. She let them watch as Jessica prepared to charge. And then she paused it, right at the moment before Jessica launched herself at me. "As you can see," Sarah said, her voice dripping with icy precision, "the initial assault was perpetrated by Jessica Miller. What happened next was a textbook case of self-defense against a second, more aggressive attack." She turned to Tiffany's lawyer. "Shall I continue the tape? Or are you ready to discuss dropping these fraudulent charges and talking about the consequences for filing a false police report?" Tiffany's mother shot to her feet, her face a mask of fury and humiliation. "This changes nothing. That girl is trained in some sort of violent combat. She's a menace." My dad, who had been silent and stoic until now, finally spoke. His voice was low, but it commanded the attention of everyone in the room. "What my daughter is trained in, ma'am, is discipline, control, something your children and, it seems, your husband know very little about." He looked directly at Officer Miller. "You used your badge to terrorize a child. My child. You should be ashamed." Officer Miller shrank in his seat, refusing to meet my father's gaze. Sarah clicked off the screen. "The DA will be dropping the charges against Imani this afternoon," she announced. "However, the matter is far from over. We will be filing a civil suit against the Miller family for malicious prosecution. We will also be filing a suit against the school district and you, Principal Thompson, for negligence in failing to address a clear pattern of bullying." Pandemonium erupted. But Sarah wasn't finished. She held up a hand for silence. "And as for you, Tiffany," she said, her eyes locking onto the girl who had started it all. "Lying to the police is a crime, but spreading defamatory lies all over the internet? That's a whole other world of trouble. I'd suggest you get ready." She paused, letting the threat hang in the air. "Because we have one more copy of this video, and it's about to go to every news station in the city." The conference room, which had been simmering with tension, flash froze into a state of shocked silence. The threat wasn't just about legal repercussions anymore. It was about public annihilation. Tiffany's mother, who had been sputtering with indignation, stared at Sarah, her mouth slightly agape. The color drained from her face. Legal battles could be fought behind closed doors with high-priced lawyers. A viral video was a different kind of beast, a public shaming from which their carefully curated reputation might never recover. "You wouldn't dare," Tiffany's lawyer finally managed, but his voice lacked conviction. He was a shark in a courtroom, but he was out of his depth in the court of public opinion. "Try me," Sarah replied, her voice as sharp and cold as a razor's edge. She didn't blink. "Your clients built their entire case on a foundation of lies, using their status and a police officer's badge to bully and intimidate a teenage girl. They tried to ruin her future. I think the public, not to mention the local news, would find that story compelling. Don't you?" Tiffany, for the first time since this whole nightmare began, looked genuinely terrified. The smug confidence, the queen bee arrogance had all dissolved, revealing the scared, entitled child underneath. She looked at her mother, then at her lawyer, her eyes wide and pleading for them to fix this. But they were just as stunned as she was. They had come here for a negotiation, expecting to bully us into a quiet plea deal. They had walked into an execution. Principal Thompson finally found his voice, a weak, reedy sound. "Now let's not be hasty, Miss Jennings. I'm sure we can come to an arrangement. Expunging Imani's record, dropping the suspension, it can be done." My dad laughed, a short, bitter sound that made Thompson flinch. "An arrangement? You stood by while my daughter was handcuffed and let out of your school. You didn't just fail to protect her, you actively participated in her persecution. There's no arrangement for that. There's only accountability." The meeting ended shortly after that. There was no grand explosion, just a quiet, humiliating implosion. The Millers, the lawyer, and Tiffany scurried out of the room, avoiding eye contact. Principal Thompson lingered, attempting a pathetic, last-ditch apology, but my dad cut him off with a single, dismissive look. We were done talking to him. The charges were officially dropped that afternoon. It was a quiet victory. There were no news cameras, no public apologies, just an email from Sarah with the official court document attached. I was no longer a criminal defendant, but I wasn't the same Imani either. The girl who hid behind books and glasses was gone, burned away in the crucible of the last 2 weeks. The video didn't go to the news stations, not right away. Sarah held it back, a sword of Damocles hanging over the Millers and the school's heads. It gave us leverage, and she used it expertly. The civil suit moved forward with astonishing speed. Faced with the undeniable video evidence and the threat of public exposure, the school district's lawyers were eager to settle. The terms were significant. A substantial financial settlement was placed into a trust for my college education. Principal Thompson was forced into an early retirement. The school was mandated to implement a new, comprehensive anti-bullying program, designed by a third-party consultant that Sarah's firm recommended. The Millers were a tougher nut to crack. Officer Miller was suspended without pay, pending the results of the internal affairs investigation. His career was, for all intents and purposes, over. Their lawyers fought the civil suit, but it was a losing battle. The video was irrefutable. They eventually settled for a sum that, as Sarah put it, would make them think twice before trying to weaponize the justice system again. But for me, the most important victory wasn't financial or legal. It was personal. The school board overturned my suspension and expunged it from my record. I was allowed to return to Northwood High to finish my last few months of senior year. Walking back into those hallways was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. The story, in its twisted, original form, had spread everywhere. But now, whispers of the real story were starting to circulate. A few people had seen the video, the school board, lawyers, a handful of administrators. The truth was leaking out, drop by agonizing drop. The ecosystem had changed. Tiffany and her crew were still there, but their power was broken. They walked the halls with their heads down. The whispers that used to follow me now followed them. Brittany, the gossip, was now the subject of it. Jessica, the enforcer, was now seen as a bully who got what she deserved. She had transferred to another school district to escape the shame. And Tiffany was a ghost. Her throne was empty. People who used to flock to her now avoided her. She'd look at me in the hallway with a mixture of hatred and fear. She had tried to destroy me, and in the end she had only destroyed herself. I didn't feel triumph when I looked at her. I just felt nothing. She was irrelevant. I wasn't scenery anymore. I was something else. People looked at me differently, some with awe, some with fear. They knew a part of the story, the part where the quiet girl fought back and won. They didn't know the cost, the fear, the nights spent staring at my ceiling, wondering if my life was over. They just saw the result. Liam, the boy who had inadvertently started it all, found me at my locker a week after I came back. He looked awkward and ashamed. "Imani," he said, "I heard what happened. All of it. I am so sorry. I had no idea Tiffany was like that. I should have said something. Done something. It wasn't your fault, Liam," I said, and I meant it. It was theirs. We stood in an awkward silence for a moment. The easy camaraderie we'd had in the library felt like a lifetime ago. "For what it's worth," he said, "I think what you did was amazing." I gave him a small smile. "Thanks." But the victory felt hollow. I had won the battle, but I still felt the wounds. The trust I'd had in the system, in teachers and principals, was gone. The sense of safety I'd once felt was shattered. I'd go to the dojo with my dad, but the movements felt different, sharper, more serious. I was no longer just practicing an art form. I was honing a weapon I now knew I might have to use. Graduation came and went. I was accepted into my first choice university on a full academic scholarship, the settlement money untouched. I was ready to leave Northwood High and everything it represented behind me. I was ready to start over, to be a new person in a new city. One hot August afternoon, a few weeks before I was set to leave for college, I was helping my dad clean out the garage dojo. We were polishing the wooden floors, the familiar scent of lemon oil and old sweat filling the air. "You're quiet," he said, not looking at me. "Just thinking," I replied. "You know," he said, stopping and leaning on his mop. "True strength isn't about winning a fight. It's about what you do after. It's about how you carry the scars." I stopped polishing and looked at him. "I just want it to be over. I want to forget it ever happened." "You won't," he said simply. "But you can use it. Don't let what they did make you hard, Imani. Don't let it make you afraid. Let it make you wise." His words settled in my heart. He was right. I couldn't erase the past, but I could decide what it meant for my future. I packed my bags for college a week later. As I was closing my last suitcase, my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. My heart skipped a beat. I opened it cautiously. The message was short, just a single sentence, but it made the blood in my veins run cold. The comfortable peace I had just started to build crumbled into dust. It was from Tiffany. "This isn't over. My father has friends. You'll be seeing me again, where you least expect it." My fingers tightened on the phone, the plastic creaking under the pressure. The message was a ghost from a past I was desperate to bury, a cold, venomous promise that reached across the miles and into my dorm room. For a moment, the old fear, the familiar anxiety, coiled in my stomach. The image of the police car, the clanging of the cell door, it all came rushing back. She wanted me to be scared. She wanted me to know that even though I had won, she still held some power over me, some ability to disrupt my peace. I took a deep breath, held it, and let it out slowly, just as my dad had taught me. Be water, not rock. Tiffany was a rock, trying to create a dam in the river of my new life. But water always finds a way. I looked at the message, at her pathetic attempt to haunt me, and then I did something the old Imani never would have done. I typed a reply. New phone, who dis? I hit send, blocked the number, and tossed the phone onto my bed. A small, genuine smile touched my lips. It was a petty move, childish even, but it was liberating. It was me refusing to play her game, refusing to acknowledge her power. Her threat was an echo, and I was choosing not to listen. College was a revelation. It was a sprawling universe of new ideas and new people, none of whom knew me as the karate girl, or the victim of a vicious bullying campaign. I was just Imani. I joined the university's martial arts club, not out of fear, but out of love for the art itself. There, I wasn't an anomaly. I was part of a community. I found people who understood the discipline, the focus, the philosophy behind the physical movements. For the first time, my training wasn't a secret to be hidden, but a skill to be shared and honed. I double majored in chemistry and pre-law. Sarah Jennings had inspired me. She had shown me that the fiercest battles weren't always fought with fists, but with intellect, strategy, and an unwavering belief in the truth. I wanted to be that kind of warrior. The scars my father had spoken of were still there, but they weren't ugly marks of shame. They were reminders of my own strength, of the importance of fighting for what's right, and of the corrupting nature of unchecked power. Years passed. The memory of Northwood High faded, becoming a chapter in a book I had long since finished reading. I graduated with honors, got into a top-tier law school, and excelled. The settlement money my parents had so carefully invested paid for my entire legal education, an irony that never failed to bring a grim smile to my face. Tiffany's hatred had, in a very real way, paid for my future. I didn't hear from her again. I didn't look her up. Her threat had been empty, the final, desperate act of a dethroned queen with no subjects left to rule. Her father, I later heard through the grapevine, had been forced off the police force and ended up in a low-paying private security job. The Millers had quietly moved out of the district. Their power, built on intimidation and influence, had crumbled to dust under the harsh light of a single video file. 7 years after I walked out of that police station, I stood in a courtroom, but this time I was on the other side of the table. I was a newly minted prosecutor for the district attorney's office, working in the Special Victims Unit. My job was to give a voice to the voiceless, to fight for those who had been bullied, abused, and silenced by people more powerful than them. One afternoon, I was reviewing the case files for the next day. I flipped open a new one, a dreary domestic dispute that had escalated into assault. I scanned the defendant's name. It was a common name, but something about it pricked at my memory. I read on, my eyes skimming the details of the report. And then I saw the address. A high-end condo downtown. A condo in a building I knew was owned by a very prominent, very wealthy local family. I flipped back to the first page and stared at the name. Tiffany Ashford. She had gotten married. My heart hammered in my chest. I felt a strange, dizzying sense of vertigo, as if the past and present were colliding right there in my office. I pulled up the booking photo on my computer. The years had not been kind. The perfect hair was now thin and brittle. The expensive clothes couldn't hide the exhaustion in her eyes, and there was a dark, ugly bruise blooming on her left cheekbone. The queen bee was gone. In her place was a broken, frightened woman. The arresting officer's report stated she had assaulted her husband during a drunken argument. Her husband, the son of a real estate mogul, claimed she was unstable, violent, and had attacked him without provocation. It was a familiar story. Too familiar. The power dynamic, the accusations of unprovoked violence. It was a twisted echo of what she had done to me. My first instinct was righteous. Karma. She was finally getting what she deserved. The bully was now the victim. But as I looked at her bruised and haunted face on my screen, I felt no triumph. I felt a deep, profound sadness. Her cruelty hadn't been a source of strength. It had been a symptom of a deep-seated weakness, a hollowness she tried to fill by making others feel small. It seemed that in the end she had simply found someone whose cruelty outmatched her own. The next day she was led into the courtroom for her arraignment. She looked small and lost in the oversized orange jumpsuit. Her eyes scanned the room, vacant and defeated. Then her gaze fell on the prosecution's table. On me. Recognition dawned slowly, followed by a wave of pure, unadulterated shock. Her mouth fell open. All the color drained from her face. In that moment she must have seen her entire life flashing before her eyes. The girl she had tried to destroy, whose future she had tried to ruin, was now standing here with the power to prosecute her, to decide the course of the rest of her life. The ultimate, crushing irony. I met her gaze across the courtroom. I held it. I didn't smile. I didn't smirk. I offered her nothing but a calm professional neutrality. I was not the scared girl in the library. I was not the vengeful victim. I was an officer of the court. I stood up when the judge called the case. Imani Williams for the people, Your Honor. I recited the charges, my voice steady and clear. But when it came to the bail recommendation, I paused. The lead prosecutor on the case had recommended a high bail, citing the defendant's erratic behavior. But I had read the full file. I had seen the history of 911 calls from that address, the reports from neighbors. I had seen the truth hidden between the lines of her husband's polished, self-serving statement. Your Honor, I said, my voice ringing with a quiet authority. While the charges are serious, the defendant has no prior record. She is not a flight risk. The people recommend she be released on her own recognizance, with a mandatory order of protection against her husband and a referral to domestic violence counseling. A murmur went through the courtroom. Tiffany stared at me, her eyes wide with disbelief, tears beginning to well. Her expensive lawyer looked just as stunned. I wasn't prosecuting her. I was helping her. The judge granted my recommendation. Later that day, as I was packing my briefcase to go home, my office phone rang. It was Sarah Jennings. I saw the court docket today, she said, her voice warm with pride. Nicely done, counselor. Very classy. She looked like she needed a life raft, I said. Throwing her an anchor didn't feel like justice. That's because it isn't, Sarah replied. You know, your dad used to say the goal of karate was to not have to use it. Looks like the same is true for the law. I hung up the phone and looked out my office window at the sprawling city below. My dad was right. True strength wasn't about winning the fight. It was about what you do after. It was about recognizing that the ultimate form of power isn't the ability to crush your enemies, but the wisdom to rise above them, to break the cycle of violence and cruelty. I hadn't offered Tiffany forgiveness. I had offered her something far more valuable, justice. And in doing so, I had finally, truly, won.